The alarm bells screamed through the Galactic Council's monitoring station as Operator Jiwon stared at his screen in disbelief. The readout showed something that shouldn't exist, a transponder code from 300 years ago. The UES Retribution, humanity's most feared warship, had just appeared on their sensors. "This can't be right," Jiwon muttered, running the scan again. The massive dreadnought sat there in space, real as the stars around it. Station Commander Hyuk rushed over, his face pale as he read the display. Every council member knew the stories about the Retribution. It was the ship that had terrorized alien fleets during humanity's rebellion, the vessel that could take on entire armadas and win. The warship looked like it had been through hell. Deep gouges scarred its black hull, and blast marks covered its armor plating. But somehow, impossibly, it was still in one piece. The ship drifted silently through the void, no lights, no movement, no signs of life. It looked like a massive coffin floating in the darkness. "Get me a full fleet, Commander," Hugh ordered, his voice shaking slightly. "And send word to the High Council immediately. Tell them the ghost ship has returned." Within hours, 12 council vessels surrounded the Retribution at a safe distance. Captain Yuna of the lead cruiser studied the ancient human warship through her view screen. Even after 3 centuries, the ship still looked dangerous. Its weapon ports were sealed shut, but everyone knew what kind of firepower lay hidden behind those armored plates. "Any response to our communications?" Yuna asked her communications officer. "Nothing, Captain. The ship's completely silent. But our scans show the hull is intact, and there's still atmosphere inside some sections." The Retribution was enormous, easily 5 times larger than any ship in the Council fleet. Its design was purely human, aggressive, angular, built for war rather than exploration. Every line of the vessel screamed violence and defiance, even in its current dormant state. "Prepare a boarding party," Yuna decided. "We need to know what's inside that ship." As the Council shuttles approached the Retribution's docking bay, the ancient doors groaned open, with a sound that echoed through space. Emergency lighting flickered on inside the bay, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The boarding team, led by Security Chief Minho, stepped cautiously onto the deck of humanity's legendary warship. The corridors were dark and cold, filled with the smell of recycled air and old metal. Their footsteps echoed as they moved deeper into the ship, past blast doors and weapon storage areas. Everything looked frozen in time, as if the crew had simply vanished one day and left their ship drifting through space. But deep in the ship's core, something was beginning to stir. Ancient systems were slowly coming back to life, and in the darkness of the stasis bay, lights began to blink on one by one. Security Chief Minho led his team deeper into the Retribution's corridors. There, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The ship felt like a tomb, silent and cold. But as they turned a corner, Minho stopped dead in his tracks. Before them stretched a massive chamber, filled with rows upon rows of gleaming metal pods. "What are those?" whispered Officer Yuna, her voice barely audible in the eerie silence. Minho approached one of the pods carefully. Through its transparent window he could see a human face, peaceful, unaged, as if the person was simply sleeping. The readout on the pod showed vital signs, steady and strong. "They're alive," he breathed in amazement. Suddenly the ship trembled. Deep within its core, something ancient stirred to life. The Retribution's AI had been dormant for 3 centuries, but the presence of intruders triggered its awakening protocols. Warning lights began flashing throughout the ship as the computer systems came online. "Unknown beings detected aboard vessel," a cold female voice announced through the ship's speakers. Initiating crew revival sequence. The boarding party looked around in panic as the ship blazed to life around them. Lights flooded the corridors, air recyclers hummed back to action, and the stasis chamber began its awakening process. Steam hissed from the pods as they started opening one by one. The first pod cracked open with a soft click. A man in his 30s sat up slowly, coughing and blinking in confusion. His uniform bore the insignia of a human captain, and his name tag read Jiho. He looked around the chamber, seeing alien faces staring at him in shock. "What? Where am I?" Captain Jiho mumbled, trying to clear his head. The stasis had preserved him perfectly, but his mind was foggy from the long sleep. He noticed the council soldiers surrounding him, their weapons drawn but not aimed. "Who are you people?" More pods began opening throughout the chamber. Men and women in military uniforms sat up, all looking confused and disoriented. One of them, a woman with lieutenant stripes named Mira, quickly moved to help her captain. "Sir, something's wrong," Lieutenant Mira said, supporting Jiho as he climbed out of his pod. "These aren't our people, look at them." Captain Jiho's vision cleared, and he saw the alien boarding party for the first time. His confusion quickly turned to anger and suspicion. "What are you doing on my ship?" he demanded, his voice growing stronger. "How long have we been out?" Security Chief Minho stepped forward, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Captain, please remain calm. You've been missing for 300 years. We're from the Galactic Council." 300 years? Jiho stared at him in disbelief. Around the chamber, more of his crew were awakening, all looking just as confused and shocked. The ship's medical bay automatically began running health checks on each person as they emerged from stasis. Lieutenant Mira helped coordinate the awakening process, checking on crew members and making sure everyone was okay. But her eyes never left the alien intruders, ready to protect her captain at a moment's notice. Captain Jiho sat in his command chair, staring at the alien diplomat who had just delivered the most devastating news of his life. The council representative, a tall creature with blue skin and multiple eyes, spoke in calm, measured tones that made Jiho's blood boil. "Your human federation surrendered after the Battle of Centauri Prime," the diplomat explained. "The war ended 250 years ago. Humanity accepted our terms of peace." "Peace?" Jiho's voice was dangerously quiet. Around the bridge, his crew listened in stunned silence. Tactical Officer Hana gripped her console so hard, her knuckles turned white. "Tell me what this peace looks like." The alien shifted uncomfortably. "Humans now live throughout the galaxy, under council protection. They work in various industries, contribute to galactic society, and enjoy the benefits of our advanced civilization." Chief Engineer Kang, a grizzled veteran with scars from a dozen battles, stood up from his station. "You mean they're slaves," he said bluntly. "Don't dress it up with pretty words." "Not slaves," the diplomat insisted, "citizens of the galaxy, with roles suited to their abilities." Lieutenant Mira pulled up data on her screen, her face growing paler by the minute as she read the reports. "Sir, according to this, humans can't own property, can't travel freely between systems, and need permits for almost everything. Children are separated from their families for education and placement." So, bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Captain Jiho felt like someone had punched him in the gut. Everything they had fought for, everyone who had died in the war, it had all been for nothing. Worse than nothing. Tactical Officer Hana finally spoke, her voice shaking with rage. "My daughter, she was 5 when we went into that battle. She'd be over 300 now if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "The human lifespan has been extended through council medical technology," the diplomat said, as if this was supposed to be comforting. "Many of your generation's children are still alive, living productive lives." "Living as what, Chief Engineer?" Kang demanded. "Factory workers, servants? What happened to our colonies, our cities, our culture?" The alien's silence was answer enough. Captain Jiho stood up slowly, his jaw clenched tight. He had seen war, had watched friends die, had made impossible choices, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Jiho said quietly. "I see conquerors who are too cowardly to admit what they've done. You didn't bring peace to the galaxy. You brought submission. Around the bridge?" His crew nodded in agreement. These weren't just any humans, they were veterans of humanity's greatest battles, soldiers who had never learned how to quit. The news should have broken them, but instead, something else was building in their eyes. "The war isn't over," Chief Engineer Kang said grimly. "It just took a 300-year break." The alien diplomat suddenly looked very nervous. The council. Fleet surrounded the Retribution like wolves circling their prey. Admiral Korax, commanding from his flagship, opened communications one final time. His voice echoed through the human ship's bridge with barely contained arrogance. Captain Jiho, you have 1 hour to surrender your vessel and submit to Council authority. Your crew will be relocated to appropriate facilities. This is your final warning. Captain Jiho looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These men and women had awakened to find their entire civilization crushed, their people enslaved, their children scattered across the galaxy like leaves in the wind. The pain in their eyes had transformed into something far more dangerous. Cold, focused rage. Admiral Corax, Jiho replied calmly, I have a message for you and your council. We didn't fight for 300 years just to surrender now. Captain, be reasonable. You have 1 ship. We have 12. Your weapons are centuries old. Submit. Now and your crew will be treated well. Lieutenant Yuki, seated at the weapons console, turned to her captain with a grim smile. Sir, our weapons systems are fully operational, all batteries charged and ready. Navigator Bora checked her screens and nodded. Escape routes plotted, Captain. We can be gone before they know what hit them. Captain Jiho stood up from his command chair. Admiral, let me show you what 300 years of anger looks like. The Retribution's hull suddenly blazed with light as weapon ports opened all along its massive frame. The Council ships, confident in their numerical advantage, moved closer to force a surrender. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Fire, Jiho commanded quietly. The space around the Retribution erupted in brilliant flashes of energy. The human warship's weapons, designed during humanity's most desperate hour, tore through the Council fleet like a hot knife through butter. Their advanced shields, built to stop modern weapons, were useless against the raw, brutal firepower of human military engineering. Lieutenant Yuki's fingers danced across her controls as she coordinated the attack. 3 ships down, sir. 4 more heavily damaged. The Council fleet tried to return fire, but their shots barely scratched the Retribution's armor. This wasn't just any human ship. It was humanity's ultimate weapon, built when they had nothing. Left to lose, Admiral Corax's panicked voice crackled over the communications. All ships retreat. Repeat, all ships retreat immediately. But it was too late. The Retribution moved through the Council formation like a predator among sheep. Navigator Bora spun the massive ship with impossible grace, bringing its weapons to bear on target after target. In less than 10 minutes, 8 Council ships were destroyed and the remaining 4 were limping away, their hulls cracked and smoking. The survivors would carry a terrifying message back to their leaders. The legendary human warship was not just alive, it was absolutely lethal. Pursuit course, sir, Navigator Bora asked calmly. Captain Jiho watched the fleeing ships disappear. Into hyperspace. No, let them run. Let them tell their council what they've seen today. The Retribution drifted alone among the wreckage, its crew finally understanding what they truly were. Not refugees from a lost war, but the beginning of a new one. Communications Officer Dana sat at her console aboard the Retribution, her fingers flying across the keys as she accessed networks that had been hidden for centuries. The underground human communication system was still there, buried deep beneath alien monitoring systems, waiting for someone who knew how to find it. Captain, I'm breaking into the old resistance channels, she reported. The networks are still active. Humans across the galaxy have been waiting for this moment. Captain Jiho nodded grimly. Send the message, Dana. Let them know we're back. Dana's transmission cut through space, reaching hidden receivers on thousands of worlds. Her voice, strong and clear, carried a message that would change everything. This is the UES Retribution. We have returned. The time for hiding is over. Your liberation begins now. On the mining world of Kepler-7, Mechanic Taiho was underneath a massive ore processor when he heard the broadcast through his hidden earpiece. His hands shook as he recognized the call sign he'd only heard in whispered stories from his grandfather. The Retribution, humanity's legendary ghost ship, was real and it was back. Taiho looked around the mining facility where he'd worked for 15 years. Alien overseers walked the catwalks above, carrying shock sticks and treating human workers like cattle. But something had changed in the air. Other workers were glancing at each other, sharing secret looks and barely contained excitement. That night, Taiho gathered with a small group of trusted friends in the abandoned section of the mine. "Did you all hear it?" he whispered. When they nodded, he smiled for the first time in years. Then you know what we have to do. Across the galaxy on the factory world of New Sol, worker Somi received the same message while assembling components for Council warships. She had been born into slavery, had never known freedom, but something deep inside her soul recognized the call to rebellion. Somi looked at the weapons she was building for her oppressors and made a decision. Instead of reporting the small defects she'd been secretly creating in the ship components, she began making them worse. Much worse. The message spread like wildfire through the human underground. On agricultural worlds, human farmers began accidentally contaminating alien food supplies. In communication centers, human technicians started introducing glitches into council networks. Factory workers across dozens of systems began subtle acts of sabotage that would take weeks to discover. But the biggest response came from the free, human colonies, settlements that had managed to avoid council control by hiding in remote sectors. Colony leader Jinwoo on Haven Station gathered his people in the main assembly hall. "Brothers and sisters," he announced, his voice carrying across the packed room, "the retribution has returned. This is the moment our ancestors died for, the moment we've prepared for our entire lives." The colonists erupted in cheers. They had been preparing for this day for generations, keeping alive the military traditions and fighting spirit that the Council thought they had destroyed. Within hours, hidden weapons caches were opened, old warships were pulled out of storage, and volunteer fighters began preparing for battle. The free colonies might not have had the Council's advanced technology, but they had something far more dangerous: 3 centuries of suppressed anger and an unbreakable will to be free. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had never truly surrendered. In the Council's emergency war room, intelligence officers frantically pulled up files that had been buried for 3 centuries. Admiral Vex, the Council's top military commander, stared at the holographic display showing the Retribution's service record, his face growing pale with each detail. "This can't be right," he muttered, reading the data again. "Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Intelligence Chief Nara shook her head grimly. "I wish it was, sir. The Retribution wasn't just any human warship. It was their ultimate weapon, crewed by the deadliest soldiers humanity ever produced." The hologram showed battle after battle, where the Retribution had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. It had single-handedly destroyed entire Council. Fleets turned the tide of losing battles and struck fear into the hearts of every alien commander who heard its name. "Look at this crew roster," Nara continued, highlighting names on the display. Sergeant Major Inho, the man who held the Titan Station for 6 months against an army of 50,000. Corporal Luna, she destroyed an entire Council supply depot with nothing but explosives and pure determination. Meanwhile, aboard the Retribution, Security Chief June was briefing Captain Jiho about what had really happened during their final battle. The bridge crew gathered around as June activated the ship's historical records. "Sir, I've been analyzing our sensor logs from the battle," June explained. "We weren't just fighting the Council fleet that day. We were protecting the evacuation, ships carrying the last free humans from Earth." The holographic display showed their final moments before the anomaly hit. The Retribution was surrounded by hundreds of Council ships, its hull taking massive damage, but still fighting with everything it had. "The temporal rift opened right as we were about to ram their flagship," June continued. "The explosion from their experimental weapon created some kind of time bubble around our ship. We were frozen in that moment, while 3 centuries passed by." Captain Jiho studied the tactical display, remembering every detail of that desperate battle. "How many evacuation ships made it out?" "All of them, sir. Every single transport escaped because we held the line." Sergeant Major Inho, standing nearby, clenched his fists. "And now we find out those people and their children ended up as slaves anyway." The crew fell silent, processing the weight of this revelation. They had sacrificed themselves to save humanity's future, only to wake up and discover that future had been stolen. Back in the Council war room, Admiral Vex was learning just how dangerous these humans really were. The files showed training records that made his blood run cold. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were specialists in impossible missions, experts at turning defeats into victories. They fought outnumbered battles for decades, Intelligence Chief Nara reported. They learned to use every dirty trick, every desperate tactic, every piece of battlefield cunning that desperation could teach them. And now they're angry, Admiral, Vex said quietly, finally understanding the true scope of what they were facing. The Retribution's crew weren't just veterans. They were legends who had been forged in the fires of humanity's darkest hour. They had mastered the art of war when everything was on the line, and now they were awake in a galaxy that had forgotten how deadly humans could be. The first liberation came at the mining colony on Vega 4. The Council garrison there had been comfortable for decades, overseeing thousands of human workers with casual cruelty. They never expected the darkness of space to suddenly light up with weapons fire. Captain Jiho studied the tactical display as the Retribution approached the heavily fortified world. Standard Council defensive pattern, he observed calmly. They haven't learned anything new in 3 centuries. The alien commanders had positioned their ships in a protective grid around the planet, confident that their superior technology and numbers would be enough. They were wrong. Lieutenant Yuki, target their command ship first. Make it quick and clean, Jiho ordered. The Retribution struck like lightning. One moment the Council fleet was in perfect formation, the next their flagship was a burning wreck drifting through space. The remaining ships scattered in panic, having never faced an enemy that could move so fast and hit so hard. Within hours, human workers on the planet's surface watched in amazement as their alien overseers fled in terror. The mine's communication system crackled to life with Captain Jiho's voice. People of Vega 4, you are free. The Retribution has come home. Medical Officer Nari set up emergency treatment centers in the ship's cargo bays as freed humans were brought aboard. Many were malnourished, injured from years of hard labor, and some had never seen the sky beyond the mine tunnels. Doctor, how many can we take? Captain Jiho asked as he watched the stream of rescued workers. As many as we need to, sir, Nari replied, checking on a young woman who hadn't spoken since being freed. We'll make room. But the real surprise came when Chief Engineer Kang approached the captain with a proposal that would change everything. Sir, these mining facilities have industrial fabricators, Kang explained, showing him the technical specifications. With some modifications, we can use them to build ships. Not fancy ones, but they'll fly and they'll fight. Within weeks, the first crude but functional warships rolled out of the converted mining facility. Former slaves became eager volunteers, learning to crew these new vessels under the guidance of Retribution officers. The pattern repeated across the galaxy. The Retribution would appear without warning, crush the local council forces with devastating efficiency, and liberate the human population. Each victory brought more volunteers, more ships, and more hope. On the agricultural world of New Harvest, Captain Jiho faced a council admiral who tried to use human hostages as shields. The admiral's message was arrogant and threatening. Surrender. Now or we'll execute every human on this planet. Jiho's response was swift and brutal. Using tactics that no alien commander could predict, he split his small fleet and attacked from 6 directions simultaneously. The council ships found themselves outmaneuvered by an enemy that thought 3 steps ahead of them. The hostage situation ended when human workers inside the council facilities rose up in perfectly coordinated rebellion, having received secret instructions through hidden communication channels. Word spread through alien military circles. Humanity was back, but this wasn't the same species they had defeated centuries ago. These humans were harder, smarter, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting their own people. The galaxy was learning to fear humanity all over again. The largest fleet in galactic history assembled above Earth. Humanity's conquered. Homeworld. Over 500 council warships from every species in the galaxy had come to end the human rebellion once and for all. At their center sat the massive command dreadnought of Supreme Admiral Corvus, its weapons capable of turning entire planets to glass. This ends today, the Supreme Admiral declared over the fleet-wide communications. The human plague will be eliminated completely. But as the Council fleet took position, something unexpected happened. The blue-green planet below began to change. Lights flickered on in abandoned human cities, and massive industrial complexes that had been dormant for decades suddenly roared to life. Deep in Earth's underground factories, Mechanic Taiho wiped sweat from his forehead as he completed the final connections on a massive weapons array. "That's the last one," he called to his team. "The orbital defense grid is back online." Across the planet, factory worker Somi led thousands of humans out of the work camps where they'd been imprisoned for generations. They poured into the streets of New Tokyo, New London, and dozens of other cities, carrying improvised weapons and 3 centuries of suppressed rage. High above the planet, the Retribution emerged from hyperspace with its small fleet of liberated human ships. Captain Jiho looked at the massive enemy force surrounding Earth and felt no fear, only determination. "They want to make their final stand here, at our home," he said quietly. "Then this is where we show them what humans are really made of." Lieutenant Yuki ran quick calculations on her tactical display. "Sir, they outnumber us 20 to 1. Our fleet can't possibly survive a direct assault." Communications Officer Dana looked up from her station with a smile. "Captain, I'm receiving signals from the surface. The resistance is ready. They're just waiting for our signal." Captain Jiho nodded. "Then let's give it to them." The battle began when the Retribution fired a single shot, not at the Council fleet, but at an abandoned satellite orbiting Earth. The satellite exploded in a brilliant flash that could be seen from the planet's surface. It was the signal every human had been waiting for. Suddenly, Earth's cities erupted in coordinated uprisings. The orbital defense platforms that the Council thought were destroyed came back online, firing devastating salvos into the alien fleet. From below, the Council ships found themselves caught between the human fleet above and the planet's defenses below. "Impossible!" Supreme Admiral Corvus shouted as his formation began to crumble. Those weapons were destroyed centuries ago, but humans had been secretly rebuilding and preparing for this moment. Every factory worker like Somi, every mechanic like Taiho, every person who had been forced to serve their alien masters had been playing a part in the greatest deception in galactic history. The Retribution carved through the enemy formation like a sword through silk, its crew fighting with the desperate courage of people who had nothing left to lose. Around them, the small human fleet followed their lead, each ship crewed by former slaves who had found their freedom. The Council's numerical advantage meant nothing when their enemies knew every trick of war and fought with the fury of the oppressed. Finally breaking their chains, the silence above Earth was deafening. Where once 500 Council warships had darkened the sky, now only scattered debris drifted through space. The few surviving alien vessels fled into the darkness, carrying word of humanity's impossible victory to the farthest corners of the galaxy. Captain Jiho stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as hundreds of human ships filled the space around their homeworld. Some were sleek vessels liberated from Council fleets, others were crude but functional ships built in hidden factories by former slaves. All of them flew the old human flag, a symbol that hadn't been seen in 3 centuries. "So we're receiving transmissions from every human colony in the galaxy," Communications Officer Dana reported, tears streaming down her face. "They're all declaring independence. The uprising is spreading everywhere." Lieutenant Yuki looked up from her console with amazement. "Captain, the Council's Central Command is trying to negotiate. They're offering to withdraw from all human territories." "Too late for negotiations," Captain Jiho replied quietly. "They had 300 years to treat our people with dignity. They chose oppression instead. On Earth's surface, the changes were happening at lightning speed." In the ruins of New Seoul, factory worker Somi stood before a crowd of newly freed humans, helping to organize the massive task of rebuilding their civilization. The factories that had once built weapons for their oppressors were now producing homes, schools, and hospitals. "We have a lot of work ahead of us," Somi called out to the gathering. "But for the first time in 3 centuries, we're working for ourselves." Across the planet, Mechanic Taiho was leading teams to restore the great cities that had been left to decay. The orbital elevators, the fusion power plants, the massive hydroponics farms, all of it could be rebuilt, better than before. The Retribution's medical bay had become a symbol of hope, as Medical Officer Nari treated thousands of humans who had never received proper health care under Council rule. Children who had been separated from their families were reunited with relatives they thought were dead. Chief Engineer Kang worked around the clock to establish communication networks that would connect every human settlement across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, families could speak to each other across the stars. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Captain Jiho received a message from the furthest human colony, a tiny settlement that had hidden from the Council for generations. The elderly colony leader's voice was shaky but determined. "Captain, this is Colony Haven 7. We never forgot the old ways. We kept the stories alive, taught our children about freedom. Thank you for coming home." Similar messages poured in from across the galaxy. Humans who had preserved their culture in secret, who had maintained hope through the darkest times, who had never stopped believing that someday their people would be free again. The retribution had become more than a warship. It was proof that the human spirit could never be truly broken. As Captain Jiho watched the sun rise over a free Earth for the first time in 3 centuries, he knew that humanity's greatest chapter was just beginning. The galaxy would never be the same again.